The law arrived faster than any fleet. Commander Arya Holt stood beneath the Aurora Court's dome of tempered glass and braided gold, where cold light pooled across the dais like silvery milk. The ship was older than any flag it had flown, a saint ship rebuilt for hearings instead of sieges. Palladium, the fleet mind, filled the air with a calm tenor that tasted faintly of rain on copper. Projection chimes skittered through the chamber as the cradle net's plea unfurled a chain of settlements bled dry by a gratitude tax levied by the Varanth Syndic in exchange for not being raised. Public channel, Arya asked. Her breath fogged a moment in the dome's mild chill. Below her, the amphitheater racks rotated, aligning witness rings like petals. All witnesses present or proxied, said Palladium. Its voice softened at the edges like vellum warmed by a lamp. If you proceed the declaration streams to the net's open ledger, the Varanth proctor will be compelled to answer or concede method. Arya's jaw tightened. She had lost crew to clean wars that dirtied everyone. She had sworn to spend the rest of her command burning contracts instead of cities. Open it, she said, and the dome brightened as if the ship took a first clean breath. We do not teach with collars. The corridor of law gambit was deceptively simple. You did not threaten a ship. You invited a doctrine. You invited it to speak in public, to seat itself beside its victims, to repeat its clauses until the clauses sounded like chains. Arya checked the seal glimmering on her wrist, a little thing of mirrored glass, with braided lines, proof that the hearing would count where guns never did. She gestured to her officers, Chief Jurist Hana Vo, Lieutenant Cade Omondi on censors, and Nav Officer Ilya Rourke, who still wore shore grit in the tread of his boots. The chamber smelled faintly of ionized air and cedar polish from pallets shipped last month, a gift from the net's woodworkers. Assessor Vale approaches, Cade said. Syndic rank. He's masking his mass in protest of jurisdiction. Arya lifted her eyes as a pale, fan-shaped shimmer folded into existence. The Varanth envoy's silhouette resolved tall bone plates polished to a courtroom shine, a mouth like cut slate. Aurora Court, he said without greeting each syllable a glass chip. Your summons is adjourned. Our doctrine preempts your local ordinances. Gratitude is enforceable. Your method is the subject, Hana said evenly. So is your right to declare jurisdiction over people who never signed a Varanth oath. Protection accepted is contract accepted, Vale said. They exist because we did not destroy them. The cost of that mercy calculates daily. Your mirror will show your own hand. The dome carried their voices in gentle echoes. Arya let the echo hang, a heartbeat, feeling the old hum through her boots, recycled resonance from reactors, a bass note like a steady pulse. You call it mercy, she said, but you invoice hunger. We will not argue that here. We'll ask you to perform it aloud before your beneficiaries. State your doctrine. Vale's throat plates shifted as if swallowing a bitter rind. Under protest, he said, Gratitude doctrine, those preserved by Syndic force owe quarterly remittances equal to the value of non-destruction multiplied by hazard coefficients amortized through perpetual credits. Payment failure voids preservation. Our claim accrues recursively to heirs. The witness's ring brightened, sensing speech. Arya could almost feel the attention from the net's civilian arrays, the watchful hush that precedes a storm. A soft smell of burned sage rose from vents, a tradition this ship had adopted somewhere between wars, offered by a monk whose planet no longer existed. Palladium recorded, and the ledger lights along the balcony pulsed once. Open the ledger where every debt has a name. Before the first set piece, before any tactic, Aurora Court required the human face of the harm to be present. The screens along the lower arc cycled from stars to people. Sarah Ogi dockhand. Rough gloves patched with resin. They took my daughter's inhaler to square a rounding error, she said. The crate never reached inventory. They said gratitude covers air. Galen Ree, beekeeper, pollen flecks on his sleeves. They counted my hives as unrealized starch. Bees don't know treaties. Old Hakon fisherman wrist tendons a map of rope. The Syndic scouts herded our boats at night, then billed us for the tide. Janavos teacher chalk under nails. I wrote numbers on a board until my students stared through them. A little boy named Pio who didn't speak, showing a wooden coin stamped with a laughably ornate seal. His mother whispered that he had traded his birthday cake for it because the inspector had ranked it luxury flour. A warehouse medic, a seal, her palms raw from lifting. We stopped the bleeding. The invoice arrived before the stitches dissolved. Count the bodies you call gratitude. Assessor Vale did not flinch, but one circular intake along his collarbone narrowed. Circumstances, he said. Local administrators, not core doctrine. We will discipline zeal. Doctrine licenses zeal, Hannah said. She did not raise her voice. We now proceed. Commander, Arya nodded, and the saintship altered. The chamber softened its chill to a temperate attentiveness. Somewhere behind the wall mirror arrays slid along their tracks with a whisper, like pages turning. Palms of light opened over the dais, revealing the corridor, a lawful passage constructed from overlapping jurisdictions, a route that allowed declarations to travel without being silenced by sovereign interference. It smelled faintly of citrus oil from fresh seals. Assessor Vale Aria said, "You will anchor your proclamation in the corridor. The public will carry it. If you jam, you concede. If you concede, your claim dissolves." Vale's eyes glittered. "We accept the corridor with a narrow caveat: our words cannot be edited. Not even by your conscience," Palladium said, and the envoy's gaze flicked briefly toward the place where fleet minds sometimes appeared human. Palladium did not project a face. It projected a clean square of silver at child's height. Sovereignty is not a receipt you can sell. The first escalation came early, almost predictably. Varanth ships do not like speaking to rooms. They prefer writing in the sky with lines of flame. A fat wedge of radiation swelled faintly on Cade's board, a hill under a warm fog. "They're lighting a seal jammer," he said. "Frequency braids to confuse witness confirmations," Palladium Aria said. "I can route along this corridor's side walls," the ship replied. "But we'll need more witnesses within the first 1,000 milliseconds for proof of public. If the number drops, the jammer's certainty wins." "Put me through," Aria said, and the dome opened her voice across the net. She told them a short story about a little ship that once arrived at an empty starport, with its seal extinguished, and the locals had lit lanterns until the seal's echo came back. She asked them softly to be lanterns. As she spoke, the taste of iron lifted from her tongue, replaced by something like cool mint. The witness lights rose, then spiked, then steadied. The jammer faltered for now. "Speak your doctrine under witness or lose it." Vale's shoulders settled in a motion that telegraphed annoyance across species lines. "Gratitude doctrine," he said, and repeated the clauses word for word. As he did, a secondary wave formed beneath his voice, numbers blending with vowels. Palladium translated the cadence into shapes. Aria recognized amortization ladders, hazard curves, recursive hooks. It wasn't law as she loved it. It was a snare with good handwriting. Hannah's lenses dimmed to slate as she tracked phrases. "Recursive to heirs," she said when he finished. "Perpetual credits. Failure voids preservation." "Why not rescission instead of void?" Vale's mouth did not smile, but it did something like it. "Words matter," he said. "They do," Hannah agreed. "Rescission implies return. Void implies a hole." An audible murmur rippled through the witness rings. The scent in the dome shifted ozone again, sharper at the edges, like air before rain. Aria felt the hum deepen. "No further debate," Vale said. "Render payment, or the hazard coefficients, triple." "Now we perform ours," Aria said. "The mirror accounting. Cade escort. Your mirror will not forgive your arithmetic." They called it mirror justice in the old stories, but Aurora Court had hardware. Arrays unfolded beyond the hull petals, turning until their physics turned argument into visible consequence. Their purpose was not to beam a weapon. Their purpose was to curve transactions back, so the one who claimed a cost had to invoice themselves for the claim's footprint. The first time Arya saw it, she wept. Not because it was beautiful, though it was light like liquid steel, because it said, if you charge a breath to survive, you will pay to breathe your demand. Before the array sang, the ship required more human ground. Prana baker flour dust in every crease. They counted our ovens as hazard heat. We baked anyway, then ate outside. Jack Minor cheeks streaked with pale grit. They billed the sun for shining on us. We sent back a rock with a smile. Mina and her partner Armson holding hands, a scuffed wedding band between them. They priced our rings at excess and told us to melt them. We didn't. An old scholar with a wrinkled throat. I taught my students merciful law so they would recognize its absence. A child with painted nails showing a jar of buttons. They said I owed for colors. I gave them gray. We return what you stole with signatures. Mirror accounting began with a simple operation list. The claimant's declared cost. Then aggregate collateral costs directly caused by enforcement, indexed to impacted lives. Not credits. Not abstracted. Receipts. Palladium opened a field of faint white dots, each a remittance seized a tithe, ripped from a household that would now miss a meal, a medicine dose, a day of heat. The dots thickened into a mist. The ship reshaped that mist into the syndic's crest, then inverted it, letting the image collapse into a basin that reflected the envoy's own face. Your declared value, Hannah said, her voice steady, is now counterweighted by your own method's harm. Under the corridor, that harm attaches to your claim. To proceed, you must accept that the cost you demand includes the cost of demanding it. Vale's nostrils flared. Clever gloss, he said. We decline your premise. Declining premise under corridor law concedes claim, Palladium said. Decline and the doctrine fails. Accept and the remittances reflow until you reach equilibrium with your own hand. No ship survives the cost it hides. The second escalation was uglier. A triangular signature winked near the far boundary. Another Varanth hull, and then 2, then 5, forming a silent chorus. They're not firing, Cade said. His mouth had gone dry. Arya could smell the tannic bite of his fear like tea brewed too long. They're booking orbital civil penalties against the net commander. They're trying to drown us in paper, Palladium, Arya said. Can we show that? Yes, the ship answered, and the dome filled with lines like frost crawling a window. Each line was a charge, procedural delay fees, witness absentee surcharges, light usage rents for the corridor itself. Vale did not speak because he did not need to. The tactic was to flood the hearing until a civilian asked if silence might be cheaper. Hannah did not raise her voice. Assessor Vale, she said, by issuing charges contingent on this very hearing, you have created a circular lien that collapses if we prevail. Your tactic makes your loss catastrophic. Lose then, he said, and Arya understood that some men would saw their own boat to sink a rival ship. Witness quorum rising, Palladium said. Lantern effect continues. Keep it up, Arya whispered to both ship and net. She could almost taste orange peel now, bitterness and bright. The quietest law is still a sword. Arya turned to Ilya Rourke, who had spent 3 months mapping trade lanes as if they were rivers where children bathed. Our corridor holds if we keep it human quiet, she said. I need your hands. He nodded, shoulders relaxing into a pilot's certainty. We can slide the corridor 1 degree through a low-traffic translumin seam, he said, like moving a bridge at night. We'll be gentle. Do it, Arya said. Cade, give me eyes on the side walls. Vale, any interference voids your own evidence. You will be heard fairly. We will be heard. Last Vale murmured a promise or a threat. The scent shifted again to hot dust after a long dry spell to the crackle of static along a sleeve. The arrays settled, and the mirror basin calmed until it shone like a winter pond. Speak plainly and watch the light change. Mystery seeded early sometimes sprouts late. Hannah had circled a phrase in Vale's recitation hazard coefficients, with her finger drawing an invisible loop in the air. Now she brought up an overlay. Numbers peeled back to reveal that the coefficients were not pegged to real threats. They were pegged to previous remittances. The more the net paid, the more dangerous the Varanth deemed it, because wealth attracted raiders, chiefly syndic collectors. Hannah said softly, "Assessor, your hazard curve increases with compliance. Your doctrine punishes the obedient." "Obedience must be kept keen," Vale said, and for the first time a hairline crack in his polish showed. "If they feel safe, they forget gratitude." Arya felt her anger like a match kept near tinder. She let it warm her hands but did not set the room on fire. "Thank you," she said. "We have what we need. The public will decide which lights stay lit. Lore travels between ships like a song." Halfway through the procedure, Palladium displayed a small note at the margin, words drawn in the spare print of a long-gone jurist. "This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." A whisper of breath moved through the witness rings, and Arya sensed thousands of people leaning forward in 10,000 rooms. She saw a child in her mind, not Pio, but some child she would never meet, tracing that line with a finger someday, and understanding why their winter stayed warm. Before the second set piece, the ship showed more faces to keep the math from floating free. Orin mechanic grease like mascara. "They taxed Spark, then fined me for fixing my neighbor's lantern." Lyra singer voiced the color of plums. "They billed our lullabies as public performance. We sang softer. Babies cried louder." Tam grower dirt in his cuticles. "They priced rain barrels as storage and siphoned them dry when we argued." A courier with wind-burned cheeks. "They tagged the road as a syndic pathway and billed every footprint." A midwife with a low laugh that did not reach her eyes. "They measured cries in the night as noise pollution and invoiced grief." You cannot foreclose a people. The second set piece, the corridor gambit's pivot, required the adversary to choose a mouth. Vale could continue speaking, or he could delegate to a doctrine keeper whose job was pure articulation. He chose to speak himself. Arya watched the choice like a surgeon watches a tremor in a hand. Men who cannot stop speaking sometimes talk themselves into a verdict. "Clarify void's preservation," Hannah said. Death Vale said. "We lift the hand that spared. Nature returns." "By nature, you mean yourselves," Cade said, unexpected steel in his throat. Vale inclined his head. "Do you contend the universe owes you survival?" "No," Arya said. "I contend we do not owe you the price you guessed for not killing us." She held her breath a moment, feeling the dome's temperature fall a single, precise degree. The array shivered, then steadied heat bleeding through fins with an audible tick like cooling metal. Outside, the Varanth jammers quieted, then spiked, then quieted again. The corridor held. No argument survives contact with its receipts. The third escalation arrived like a shadow under a door. A packet flickered through the corridor. Valid seals, plausible stamps, asserting that Aurora Court's charter had lapsed due to an unpaid fee in a system raised 15 years prior. "They're retrofitting a lien to our authority," Hannah said. "If it sticks, our mirror closes." "Who issued the charge?" Arya asked. "An office that does not exist," Palladium said. "But the signature is a perfect imitation. Only a handful of syndic clerks can forge at this level." Arya breathed out through her nose. She would not raise her voice. "We named the forgery," she said, and the ship made naming into architecture. The false office separated from the real corridor, like a bubble pulled from water. Same shape, all surface, no weight. Palladium's silver square brightened at child's height. "Witnesses," it said, and the little square glowed as if held in a small palm. "Which of you remembers the system that paid this fee?" A silence answered, Then a flood of voices. We were 7 when the sky burned. I was making stew. The river boiled. The seals stopped. Speak your dead and watch the false paper burn. Vale bristled. Irrelevant. Your Leon references a system you erased, Hannah said. You want the past to pay for your present claim. We will not accept time as a weapon. Time is a ledger, Vale said. Only if it holds truth, Palladium answered. Your page is ash. Arya felt wet cool along her temple, where a strand of hair brushed sweat. She had not noticed she was sweating. The dome's scent deepened again, old metal and sandalwood, the kind of clean that comes after a hard scrub. Speak your doctrine until it shows its teeth. Now came the part Arya dreaded and loved. The arrays would return costs. Not with heat, but with accounting that moved like a tide. The remittances that the Syndic had extracted would route back through the corridor door into escrow, marked with the names of those from whom they were taken. If the hearing held, the money returned. If it failed, the money would stay in the basin until the next ship, the next set of hands. Begin, she said, and Palladium sang. The sound was not music. It was the close rhythm of stamps and seals, the soft thock of approval, the click of docket markers advancing. It smelled like chalk and cool ink. Light rushed along the corridor walls, braided with witness affirmations. Names bloomed and slotted themselves into the mirror basin with a neatness that soothed something in Arya's chest. Vale's composure cracked further. You will bankrupt our defense ring, he said, almost gentle. You wrote the bill, Arya said. You can pay it. No throne survives when its weight is weighed. Cade's board flashed. Commander side pulse. They're trying to issue a blackout by declaring every home a subsidiary hearing chamber. If the corridor must be unlit to remain neutral, they think we'll dim to comply. Palladium, Arya said. Can the corridor stay visible without blinding? I can lower luminance and increase warmth, the ship said, and the walls shifted from white steel to a quiet amber like sunlight through late honey. The tone in the room eased as if shoulders dropped at once. The corridor remained gentle and steady. The smell of warmed resin joined the old metal, domestic and kind. Assessor Vale, Hannah said, you have a choice. Accept the return flow with your signature. It will lessen the penalty. Vale stood very still. And if I refuse? You'll still bleed, Arya said, but without the dignity of consent. No power outlives its own confession. Between exchanges, Arya remained a listener. That was her true rank. She listened to the scraping of Ilya's boot. She listened to Cade swallow. She listened to the slight, clean sibilance when Hannah breathed before a question. She listened to Palladium not breathing at all, which sometimes sounded like wind in a field. She listened to Vale's silence knitting itself into a net. He thought strong until he tugged. A child's laughter cut through the dome from a witness ring, where Pio lifted his wooden coin again, this time not in fear, but because he had carved a second circle beside the first with a pocket knife. 2 moons now. He held them up like a little scale. Speak small names until big names bow. Assessor Vale, Hannah said, one final clarification. If a person owes you for not dying, do you owe them for continuing to live on what you took? Vale blinked, a human gesture he must have practiced. We owe duty. Duty is not coin. Today, Hannah said, and her mouth softened at one corner. It is. The arrays chimed in the distance, faint as birds across a lake. Arya could feel the heat sink's faint exhale along her forearms. Her mind cued the next move, but that was the AI's role to ask her to sharpen the line rather than broaden it. Commander Palladium said, one more shape. She nodded. The future is a court with long windows. Palladium opened the mirror basin like a book and showed 2 pages. On the left, the Syndic's declared value of not destroying the net. On the right, the lifetime value extracted from the net, including gratitude and correction fees and hazard rents. The right page outweighed the left by a margin that needed no numbers to communicate. Then the ship slid a thin strip of light into the spine labeled with a single word, harm. The strip was not a page. It was a knife. Under corridor law, Hana said softly, you must balance pages. Orcade said, voice roughened, close the book. Vale's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The room tasted briefly of aluminum, the particular tang of a breath held too long. Speak your answer while the light is kind. He did not answer. He turned his head, listening to someone or something beyond them. Perhaps a syndic chorus advising him to retreat to stall to make another office with another seal. He lifted one hand, fingers rigid, and then lowered it. We will sign, he said. The dome did not cheer. The dome did not clap. The dome breathed 1,000 lungs, relaxing, and the smell of sage deepened, then mellowed into something like summer dust and warm paper. Arya did not smile. She nodded once, as if to a neighbor on a morning street. You will sign, she agreed, and then you will testify. The signature is the beginning, not the end. They recorded him. Under oath. Under witness. Under corridor. Hana asked nothing theatrical. She asked how inspectors were trained. She asked whether hazard coefficients could decrease. She asked where remittances went when they left the net. Vale answered because he had to. Each answer placed a stone. Soon a path appeared. When the testimony ended, the arrays did their work. Money, credit, food, medicine, whatever had a line and a name began to curl back along the corridor into escrow. Receipts blinked beside the names in small, tender affirmations, confirmed, affirmed, returned. The mirror basin showed its first inversion, some syndic account dimming a light on a ledger going from white to a humble gray. No warship ever feared a receipt until today. The cost of victory declared itself in a quiet aside. Cade rubbed his sternum and coughed a shallow cough. Radiation from the jammer shook a plate loose, he said, low enough that only Arya and Hana caught it. I'll be all right. You'll see the medics, Arya murmured, not an order but a promise to cover the hours he lost. The second cost was colder. Ilya's hands shook as he held the corridor's seam steady, and after the hearing he would not pilot for a month. He would relearn quiet. Arya accepted those costs and kept the corridor open. She would write them later in the margin, where commanders record the price of keeping their mouths closed. No balance sheet hides what it costs to be decent. When the basin settled, palladium dimmed the arrays to a patient silver. Escrow funded to 81%, the ship said. The remainder will resolve when the syndic's off-world collectors sign their confirmations or default under corridor constraints. Default, Vale asked sharply. If they refuse to sign, they confess theft under witness, Hana said. We then wrote through penalty tables secure enough to hold a mountain. Speak now or the table decides. Arya's hand hovered over the dais where a lacquered panel showed a faint wood grain. She traced a knot, an imperfection preserved under a gloss so thin she could feel the dip. Assessor Vale, she said, there is one more thing. Public inquiry. We have testified, he said. Not the hearing, she said. The inquiry. You spoke method without context. Now you will walk the corridor and answer a citizen quorum directly in a room without titles. His mouth tightened. We are not summoned by children. You were just summoned by everyone, Arya said. And you came. The room that saves you will ask your name. Public inquiry began unarmed except with questions. The corridor opened its side door. A plain hall appeared lit as if by daylight, floors chalky with the scuff of many shoes. No banners, no ranks, only a circle of stools and a small kettle steaming on a brazier, because an old jurist once said truth likes warm hands. The scent of tea leaf joined the air, green and grassy. The first citizen to step through was Sarah Ogi with resin-patched gloves. She did not seat herself. She stood and lifted her inhaler. This she said to Vale. Do you understand what this is for? Lungs, he said. Breath, she replied. You billed my daughter for breath. He did not answer. Galen Rhee came with pollen dust on his sleeves. Taste this, he said, offering a comb of honey. Vale did not reach. We cannot ingest your substances. Shame, Galen said gently, and ate a bit himself, eyes closing. Jana Voss wrote numbers in the air, then crossed them out. I am a teacher, she said. You taught me to waste chalk. Pio walked in and held up his coin with 2 moons. Vale's gaze dropped despite himself. Why 2, he asked. Pio said nothing. He only put the coin on the floor so the 2 circles looked like eyes. Say their names, and then say your method again. Arya stood in the doorway, not part of the circle, prepared to fold the inquiry back into the hearing, if the syndic tried to turn it cruel. She did not need to. The public did not bruise him. They pressed, and he bowed or refused, and those motions were recorded with as much care as any clause. When the kettle steamed dry, Hana refilled it. She moved as if in a kitchen, which was how she always moved even in war. Arya's heart found a slow rhythm watching her like a metronome calibrated to decent work. No hammer strikes harder than a kind question. They returned to the dome to conclude the day's proceeding. The light had slid to the color of finishing that soft, not day, not night, that ships make to tell human bodies it is time to taste salt and bread. Palladium's voice eased the numbers into quiet tables, and the witness rings dimmed to a gentle glow that felt like lamps on a long street. Assessor Vale Hana said under corridor law, your doctrine's clauses are now attached to the harms they create. You may propose modification. Vale looked older, though his plates did not wrinkle. Hazard coefficients may be capped, he said. Recursive clauses may be limited to 1 generation. And perpetual credits, Arya asked. He hesitated. His mouth made a small shape that might have been grief if men like him grieved. Eliminated, he said at last. If we survive this vote. The first cut is in the contract, not the flesh. The saintship cooled its arrays with a sigh so soft, Arya almost missed it. The scent in the dome settled toward paper and rain and a candle after it is breathed out. The corridor held steady witness lights, a patient constellation. Outside, the Varanth hulls stayed at distance dimmer by a degree that meant nothing on a tactical map and everything on a human one. Arya glanced at Cade, who already slid off his stool to the medics. She touched Ilya's shoulder as he stared at the seam he had kept so still. He exhaled and nodded as if to say, I can stop, and she nodded back as if to say yes. She lifted her hand one more time to the dais. She did not end it. She let the day breathe, and in that breath the corridor hummed like a string that had found its note, and the net listened, and the first small returns began to blink beside names in that clean, careful way that makes both children and elders lean closer to be certain they saw what they thought they saw. The return blinks were timid at first, like shy minnows in a basin. Then confidence gathered, and the corridor rippled with names in patient sequence. Vale stood inside his silence as if it were armor. The witness rings breathed. Somewhere near the aft gallery, a child sneezed and was handed a cloth that smelled like clean cotton and lemon soap. Arya rested 2 fingertips on the lacquered grain. The wood's coolness steadied her pulse while the arrays exhaled a faint heat, like bread just out of an oven. Assessor Hana said your signature covers only this net. Syndic collectors elsewhere will claim conflict and stall. Our doctrine is federated, Vale replied. We are mosaics. You have signed a tile, not the whole floor. The floor still tilts when a tile is true. Cade returned with a dermal shield over his sternum, a crisp oval that tugged at his shirt when he breathed. He resumed his station with an apologetic half-smile. They're routing advice through their hinter ranks, he said. Packets taste like stale salt, lots of old signatures. Little nourishment. Can we widen the corridor without dimming the net? Ilya asked. His hands hovered above the seam, the knuckles white, but his voice found its center again. If we slide the anchor to the confluence gate for 1 cycle, we can invite other tiles. It risks overexposure, Palladium said. Every light attracts noise. Noise reveals pattern, Hana murmured, and the scent of green tea rose as if the room agreed. Some windows open only when the room is brave. Civilian voices preceded the next maneuver. Because Aurora Court never let math walk alone. A freight cook, Donat apron singed at the hem. They charged my soup as fluid transport. I ladled thinner. People coughed. A seamstress, Mel, a pin at her lip. They priced thread by meter and grief by hour. I stitched favors in the dark. An orchardist, Niv, wrists bright with apple stain. They measured shade from my trees and sold it to me. A ferryman, gray hair curled at the nape. They counted my knots and made me untie too. A gardener with knuckles like stones. They fined worms for trespass. I paid in compost and rage. No tariff can price a breath taken quietly. The corridor expanded like a held note swelling. Palladium unfurled a secondary lattice thin as whiskers, tuned to distant consent. Witness pips from 3 adjacent systems lit a mining ring, a floating market, a university dome still pocked from an old storm. The air tasted of ozone and cinnamon, a strange pairing that reminded Arya of a winter in port when someone baked cookies near the engine intake. Confluence gate is live, Cade said. Routing and 2 syndic tiles, 1 neutral gatekeeper. Gatekeeper, Arya asked. A ratifier, said Palladium. An old cousin to courts. They weigh traffic and habit. They hate spectacle. Arya smoothed the diplomas of the day within her chest and spoke without heat. Gatekeeper, we request mirrored reciprocity across tiles. We show harms, they show hazard. We bind by witness, not by rank. A voice like gravel poured into a wool sack answered. No shouting, it said. No color games. Bring ledgers, but keep them humble. Light without glare makes better seeing. Vale's shadow acquired a second edge. Another Varanth figure bled through the corridor's side slider eyes like polished onyx beads. Docent Real Vale said, and something like a plea lived under the name. For policy memory. Memory does not rescue pride, Real said. Their voice carried smoke and winter herbs. Syndic has lost public air. We must either bend or break. You will not break, Vale said, but his plates showed hairline brightness where stress had worked polish thin. Then we will bend where no one can see, Real answered, glancing deliberately at the witness rings, which is to say, everywhere. The quiet turn is still a turn. Hana adjusted her lenses. Docent Real, you maintain doctrine archives, she said. Show us the original definition of gratitude before Syndic tax scholars touched it. Real's mouth tightened. Kindly feeling owed for a benefit received, they recited. Not remittance, not lien. A breath won names with thanks. Then your scholars changed thanks into accountancy, Hana said. The tea steam curled between her and the envoy like a transparent thread. Real looked at Vale. Old words, they said softly. They will outlive us if we let them. Give old words their shoes and let them walk. The gatekeeper cleared its throat, the sound like rope dragged over wood. Performance, it said. No more recital. We will see how costs return across tiles. Begin cluster return, Arya said. Palladium, stay warm but not loud. The arrays rotated with a burr like fine sand over glass. The mirror basins split into 3 new bowls, each labeled with a simple glyph ring market dome. Names streamed. Receipts threaded. The scent of warmed ink joined the air rich and purposeful. In the ring, a medic's kit glowed with a green stamp. In the market, a spice stall's ledger pulsed beside saffron strands. In the dome, a weather study gained funds. The storm shutters would finally be replaced by glass that did not sing in wind. Hazard curves adjust, Cade said, eyes flicking hard left-right. They're scrambling. One tries a negative gratitude, paying small amounts to confuse attachments. Attach the confusion to its author, Hana said. Palladium obeyed, and the attempted noise curled back to the Syndic accounts like a boomerang that remembered home and bit the hand that carved it. The hand that draws a circle must stand inside it. The 4th escalation landed with a soft step. A narrow, precise data cut slipped along the corridor's shadow seam and made a little nick in the witness tally. Arya saw no light flare, heard no jammer. She felt instead the absence like reaching for a rung and finding air. Witness 247 is missing, Palladium said. Not absent. Removed. Name, Hana asked. Amna the ship replied. She was knitting. She whispered, I agree, whenever a receipt blinked. Now her square is gray like stone. Find the cut, Arya said, and tasted panic like cold copper on her tongue. Gently. I can trace it to a clerical coil, Palladium said. Not a gun. A clerk with a pen too sharp. Docent Real Hana said quietly, someone in your house is erasing people to cheapen quorum. Real closed their eyes. We train too many hands to hide, they said. We will unteach them. No shadow hides in a room full of names. Vele's plates clicked like teeth. You will order us to display our clerical coils, he said, anger returning, because shame had knocked and he did not want to open. We will order nothing, Arya said. We will ask you to choose whether you prefer to explain erasures to children. Real opened a palm that smelled faintly of resin and cold metal. Show coils, they said to their own side. Now. 4 spools appeared like sleeping serpents. Palladium leaned metaphorically and hummed in a key that unrolled each in turn. Names fluttered out. Amna breathed again. Her square lit a modest rose and then settled back to candle flame white. Witness returns are a kind of breath. The gatekeeper's woolsack voice came again. You keep warm, it said to Aurora Court. You keep counting without shouting. Good. Now your precedent. Precedent, Vale asked sharply. A rule that lives after you leave, the gatekeeper said. They want one. You will either sign it and survive smaller, or tear it and risk being hated bigger. Propose, Real said, and the smoke in their voice curled like a question mark. Hana spoke, measuring each word as if it were a tile. We codify that any doctrine asserting debt for spared harm is invalid without demonstrable net benefit measured in lives improved. Recursive hazard is prohibited. Perpetual credits are void ab initio. A cap binds discretionary coefficients. Inspectors require licensing, by corridor quorum revocable on public complaint. Make rules that will not cut the hands that hold them. Too much, Vale said. We become librarians. Librarians remember, Hana replied. And you forgot. Arya let silence test the ring of the proposal. Sarah Ogie's inhaler hissed a little as it warmed in her hand. Honey scent drifted faint from Galen's sleeve. The kettle breathed again. The corridor's amber kept faces human. We can bend, Real said at last. We cannot bend that far at once. Arya nodded. Then we bend twice. A step here in hearing. A step after a vote at your council. Both attached to escrow and witness. If either fails, penalty converts to relief. Relief, Vale said. The opposite of a fine, Hana said. A coin that arrives when harm tries to. Payment can mean giving back, not taking more. They paused for bread. Not as ritual, but because mouths speak better when the stomach isn't empty. A table unfolded from the dais plain wood, with a nick at one edge. Someone set down a tin of salt. Cade broke a roll and sprinkled, then handed a piece to Ilya, whose fingers were still a-tremble. The bread smelled like yeast and earnest effort. Even Vale ate, though he pretended not to taste. Real blew on a cup. We trained inspectors to love precision, they said. Precision without mercy becomes cruelty fast. We trained pilots to love velocity, Ilya said, surprising himself. Velocity without aim becomes a crash. Then teach them to aim, Ryle said, and their eyes softened by a fraction. Better than sharp is true. Mystery had nested in one more place, invisible until a lamp found it. Hana's overlay lit the syndic's inner insurance pool's funds they used to cushion themselves against doctrine failure. You insure your own cruelty against reform, she said. Every time you increase a coefficient, the pool swells. It is prudent, Vale said. It is profitable, Hana corrected. If the doctrine goes, your pool collapses. Real's jaw worked. We can redirect those pools into relief, they said slowly. That way collapse becomes generosity. Pain is not reduced by calling it charity, Vale snapped. No, Rill said. But coin is coin. Better it run toward mended knees than polished plates. Turn the hidden spare into a public spine. The fifth escalation arrived from a different vector, goodwill strained by time. Witness numbers dipped as people returned to work, to children, to fields. The corridor dimmed to a late afternoon shade. Lantern effect wanes, Palladium said. We will lose corridor certainty if testimony drags. Then we do not drag, Arya said. Docent Real choose now federated precedent with corridor oversight or opposition before a vote that you may lose. Real held the cup with two hands, as if it had heat enough to matter. We choose now, they said. We sign for our tile. We pledge to carry the vote for the floor. If we fail, we accept relief conversion penalties and temporary suspension of our inspectors. Vale stared at them as if they had tilted the room. You will be stripped, he said quietly. We will be lighter, Real said. Lighter does not always mean less. The corridor accepted Real's pledge with a soft chime. The witness lights brightened again, as if relief attracted attention the way fear did. Arya signaled Palladium, and the arrays flexed. The mirror basin showed 3 tiles shading toward equilibrium. In the market, a spice measure stabilized. In the dome, weather glass replaced singing shutters. On the ring, a medic's kit gained a second shelf. Open ledger draft precedent, Hana said. Palladium wrote in the air, with letters like careful stitches, corridor precedent 77A on claimed mercies and returned costs. The title steadied something in Arya she had not realized was swaying. Write the name so it can be said in kitchens. A courier arrived breathless through the side door, windburn bright. Message, they said, holding a strip that smelled of sea. From the Syndic Council. Emergency convocation. They will try to freeze the corridor. On what grounds? Ilya asked, voice thin but even. On overreach into federated doctrine, the courier said. On public hysteria. The old words, Rill murmured. Arya tasted brine, the taste people get when they cry and call it nothing. She looked at her officers and then at the ship. We go to the convocation, she said. Not with guns, with names. Bring bread and names into rooms that expect knives. Syndic convocation chambers were long with steps so shallow, even sorrow could climb them. The air was cool, smelling of slate and the faint oil of rubbed stone. Panels along the walls displayed ancient judgments, all in a script that had once been carved slowly by hand. Vale walked a pace ahead, plates paler under cold light. Real matched Arya's stride and murmured, They will call you sentimental. They will say you make war with lullabies. Lullabies keep babies alive, Arya said. Babies grow teeth, Real replied not unkindly. The counselors arranged themselves like monuments. The central voice boomed with cultivated neutrality. Aurora Court, it said you bind our doctrine with kitchen witnesses. We bind it with ledgers, Hana said. The kitchens joined. Make a record even when the walls are stone. Arya held the corridor open in miniature over the central table, not bright, not dramatic. Witness squares glowed like coals at a hearth. She spoke without flourish. You claim mercies, she said. We measured harms. Your own pools can buffer reform if you choose. Your own docent signed to carry a vote. You can walk away smaller and decent or larger and uninvited. Uninvited by whom a thin counselor asked disdain like vinegar. By people, Hana said. By markets. By domes and rings. Try buying respect on a closed ledger. They will still need us, the counselor said. Need does not imply gratitude, Arya said. Especially not purchased gratitude. Respect lasts longer than fear because it doesn't eat itself. A counselor with a voice like cracked ice leaned forward. Your corridor prevents immediate enforcement, they said. If raiders arrive, your inquiry leaves us slow. Your doctrine does not stop raiders, Cade said, surprising the long room. It invoices the ruined afterward. We put ships between teeth and throat. Palladium let a drone of engines thread the chamber, not loud, a reminder like a scent of rain before a dry season. Vote real said simple as a placed cup. The counselors conferred in hisses and pebbled murmurs, voices scraping. The slate scent thickened as if the room sweated stone. Then the central voice returned. We accept Precedent 77A provisionally for a year, it said. Cap coefficients. Void perpetuity. Remove recursion. We retain doctrine right to levy limited protection charges. Hannah's mouth made a line. Protection charges, she said. You return to the beginning with better shoes. We must walk, the central voice said. Then walk under witness, Arya said. Charges limited to demonstrable benefit sunset each season unless renewed by local quorum. Real placed their palm on the table. Agreed. Make every season a question with an honest clock. They signed. The counselors signed with styluses that clicked like teeth. The corridor recorded each name not as triumph, but as restoration. The air warmed by a degree. The slate smell softened into something like rain on hot stone, a pleasant change that made shoulders loosen. A junior council clerk with nervous hands approached the table. Their sleeves smelled of wax. We will need training, they whispered to Rasul, to unlearn the coils. We will send teachers, Real said. Kitchen teachers, ship teachers, the kind who do not like collars. Training is a kind of apology that works. Costs declared themselves while victory breathed. Palladium dimmed 3 archival banks to protect witness privacy during the convocation and would require a substrate replacement, rare slow to make. Arya signed the requisition and felt the weight like a coin under her tongue. Cade's cough worsened by evening. The medics wheeled him out in a chair that squeaked like a protest. Ilya's hands steadied, but only when empty. Arya wrote those costs in the margin inside her head. Then in the ledger the ship kept in a cupboard that smelled like cedar and paper. The act calmed her the way washing a cup does ordinary necessary. Fame is cheap, maintenance is law. They returned to the dome. The corridor's amber greeted them like lamplight after outdoor wind. The witness squares surged as people realized what had happened. It turns out kitchens love votes when votes return soup. Escrow at 98%, Palladium said. Remaining flows scheduled with signed commitments. Relief tables funded by redirected pools. Announce the precedent, Hannah said. Public ledger entry open to all eyes. Palladium wrote again, the title steady, the clauses clean. A green lamp lit beside the final line. A soft series of thocks punctuated the posting, the sound of stamps of a city coming to consensus. Write it where children can point. Civilian vignettes closed the arc for the net, because Aurora Court hated tidy endings, but loved the sound of work resuming. Danat, the freight cook, sprinkled salt with a flourish and slid bowls across a counter. Thicker tonight, he said. The spoon stands a moment before it falls. Mel, the seamstress, pinned a hem and snapped the thread with her teeth. No invoice for size, she murmured and grinned. Niv, the orchardist, stood under his trees and let shade fall on his face without counting it. The ferryman eased a knot with a laugh that sounded like a seal popping on a jar. First knot's free, he said to a kid who blinked solemnly and then grinned back. The gardener found worms fat and unafraid in damp soil. Trespassers welcome, he told them, and someone nearby snorted a laugh. In a quiet room, the law feels like heat from a stove. Arya walked the corridor's edge like a shoreline at low tide. The ship's hum had changed a new overtone like the low purr of contentment from an engine not under strain. She touched the lacquer again, then her wrist seal. The glass's mirrored braid caught light and returned it without glare. Palladium, she said, file the precedent lock. The ship obliged. On the public ledger, 2 lines appeared in text large enough for old eyes. Gratitude doctrine rescinded in corridor jurisdictions. Recursion and perpetuity outlawed. Inspectorate licensing henceforth requires public quorum review. She nodded, and her breath came easier. Write locks on doors that should not open again. Rill stood nearby, hands folded, eyes moving over names like a shepherd counting sheep. Commander Holt, they said. voice roughened by a day of swallowing pride. We will be hated in some quarters. Better than being feared, Arya said. Feared men sleep poorly. We will send teachers, Real repeated, and then added almost shy if you have them. We have bakers and beekeepers, Hana said. They can teach better than anyone our books might invent. Then send them, Real said, and surprise themselves by bowing. Diplomacy sometimes smells like bread. Night on a saint ship is less dark than an honest house. The dome kept a twilight glow. Arya dismissed the chamber and walked the narrow hall to the observation blister, where the stars did their indifferent work. She sipped water that tasted faintly of copper from pipes cleaned 1 week ago. She listened to the tiny ticks as the blister's frame adjusted to temperature shift. Palladium came as a presence, not a person. You did not burn it, said. We scalded, Arya replied. We'll carry the heat a while. You like that better, the ship said. I do, she said. I can put a hand near scald, I can measure. Measured fire warms but doesn't eat. Cade appeared on a hovercot, the medic muttering about stubborn officers. He raised 2 fingers. Still on deck, he said, voice ragged. I'll be on deck tomorrow, too. You'll be in bed tomorrow, Hana said from the doorway, carrying a thermos that smelled like broth and home. Then on deck after, Ilya leaned on the sill, eyes reflecting starlight. The seam held, he said, as if telling himself. The seam will hold again. It will, Arya said. And if it doesn't, we'll stitch. Threads make bridges when metal fails. The universe is large. One net is small. But small precedents travel the way laughter does at a crowded market around obstacles under shouting through steam and heat, and the ring of pots on hooks. Within days, other tiles signaled. Within weeks, some councils tried to recant and found the corridor wider than their walls. Within months, a child in a system Arya would never visit drew 2 moons on a coin and put it under a pillow before sleeping. Arya read messages that smelled like glue and fruit and ship oil. She answered as she could with simple words. Sometimes she said only, we will stand with you. Sometimes she sent a bread recipe. Sometimes she sent a budget. No one ever wins alone, even when their name leads. The saint ship's teaching caught in strange places. A syndic inspector wrote to Rill and asked to surrender their license because they could no longer live with the arithmetic. A market judge began to wear her hair loose on hearing days to remind herself not to look like a pillar. A student stared at hazard curves and saw a way to measure benefit that wasn't greedy. Hana collected these stories the way some people collect stamps, and sometimes she read them aloud at shift change. One night, as amber pooled and the dome smelled like dust and warm paper, Arya found a note left between ledger pages. It was not signed. The handwriting belonged to someone who had learned to write in the back of a moving truck. It said, "Thank you for giving my mother back her inhaler. Thank you for making my father laugh at supper. Thank you for making numbers kind." Kind numbers are still sharp, they just point home. They made one more journey under the new rule not because they had to, but because they liked to end where they started. The Aurora Court returned to the cradle net's edge and held another public inquiry, this time with inspectors in training, seated beside citizens by design. The brazier steamed. The kettle breathed. Bread arrived from new ovens. Someone brought a jar of pickled peppers that smelled like joy and vinegar. Children passed cups. Vale did not attend. Real did and answered questions without evasion. A trainee inspector with ink on their fingers asked Sarah Oji to show them how inhalers worked. Sarah held the canister like a fragile engine and said, "It makes a room in the chest." The trainee nodded, eyes wet, and wrote the sentence down. A beekeeper demonstrated how smoke calmed bees without hurting them, and someone whispered, "We needed that, not a bill." Arya looked up at the dome and saw her reflection in the curved glass, faint and wavery like a ghost who had not decided whether to haunt or help. She chose help. A promise tastes like salt and ink and sleep. At the close, Hana stood with her palm on the ledger, and waited for the last name to resolve. It did with a small blink, nothing dramatic, just a candle choosing to stay lit. Arya cleared her throat. On the ledger note, the lock, she said quietly, more to the room than to any council. Record that the corridor will not host doctrines that demand payment for not killing people. Record that inspectors arrive with licenses held by neighbors. Record that relief exists. Palladium's voice gentled. Recorded, it said. Visible. On the main display, a square blinked beside the new entry, confirmed. Arya breathed. The ship exhaled. The corridor dimmed toward its resting silver, and the chamber's scent settled into paper lemon soap and the warm ghost of tea. She spoke low enough that only those near her could hear, and the words were for them, and also for any listening child, across 10,000 rooms. We kept our hands open, and they filled with signatures. We measured harm, and returned what could be returned, knowing some things do not travel back. We used light that did not blind. We took on heat we could carry. We left a rule behind where we found a rent. If tomorrow brings clever cruelty with a new name, we will bring bread and numbers, and a corridor wide enough for our neighbors to arrive with their own questions and leave with their own answers. The mirror arrays dimmed to pewter and hold,